So, we're really excited to have you all today, and we're going to get started. So today you're here for Fire Followers, our Beaty at Home session. Beaty at Home is our roughly weekly virtual programming we do with the Beaty Biodiversity Museum. You can expect us to be together for, half an hour to an hour, depending on how the chats go today. And we are really excited to have a variety of special guests today. First of all, we have Megan Majewski, artist from Fire Followers. If you want to give a wave, you're welcome to. And we also have Sharon Roberts, a writer behind Fire Followers. On the museum side of things, we've got Derek Tan, our exhibits manager here, who's going to help us out along the way. Nancy Lee, our museum interpreter, she is currently on the floor of the museum, and myself, Nicole Balston, helping out with tech and slides along the way. To get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the Beaty Biodiversity Museum, as well as UBC's Point Grey campus, is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We do really encourage you to learn more about the territory you're joining us from today, as well as Musqueam. You can learn more at musqueam.bc.ca. The image I'm showing is a flag from Musqueam, which was raised at UBC a few years ago, that shows a salmon and salmon eggs, which is an important part of the ecosystem, and I really appreciate getting to learn so many different ways of understanding the biodiversity around us from people's experience, from time immemorial, as well as from the research that happens here at the university. Now I'm going to pass it to Sharon for our next slide. So go ahead, Sharon.
Thanks so much, Nicole. So before we get started and dive into the presentation, we also wanted to take a moment to recognize the current impact that wildfires are having in British Columbia, and in particular, the tragic fire in Lytton, BC. While we aim to create an open and safe place to discuss our evolving relationships with wildfire, we also acknowledge that this discussion can be triggering for some given these current conditions. And we express our deepest sympathy and stand in solidarity with communities and individuals across the province who are being impacted by wildfire. We also recognize the work that's being done by fire crews in BC, anyone who's traveled here to support our own local crews, as well as all of the people involved in the emergency response effort. And thank you all for attending today, and welcome. We invite you to add your voice to this important conversation, either by commenting in our chat or reaching out to us after the presentation. Back to you, Nicole.
Thank you. I know so many of us have been touched by fire, and even just the experiences we've all had collectively this summer so far. I really am looking forward to hearing about everyone's experience and how they connect to this topic. Before we dive into the content of this exhibit, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Beaty Biodiversity Museum. So we're located at the westernmost point of Vancouver, over at UBC's Point Grey campus. If you're on campus, we're close to the Aquatic Ecosystems Research Laboratory, across the street from the Pacific Museum of Earth, nearby the bookstore, education, engineering, right in the middle of the university hub. We work with a lot of people on campus. I mentioned Musqueam before, but we also work with the Belkin Gallery, Museum of Anthropology, Pacific Museum of Earth, Botanical Gardens, lots of lovely things to come and see if you're out at the university. And I'm curious, because this is a little bit of a different talk than we've done for our previous Beaty at Homes. I'm curious if any of you have joined us virtually before or have seen the museum in person. We're going to talk about an exhibit that is physically at the museum. So I'm so curious to see who's seen it before and who is excited to come in the next couple of months. When you walk up to the museum, you will see a glass atrium that has a big blue whale skeleton inside. This is the largest of our 2.1 million specimens we house safely for the university, for research, for teaching, and for learning. The museum is open Tuesday to Sunday from 10 until 5, so I do encourage you, if you're in the area, to come and take a visit. I mentioned a few of our neighbors, but we are also part of the Biodiversity Research Center, which includes the museum as well as 50 faculty and their graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, and students from so many departments across UBC working together on contemporary biodiversity research areas, some of which are heavily involved in learning about fires, like ecology, communities, climate change, and patterns through mathematics and genetics. So many interesting things are happening right now, and fire can be one part of how we're understanding biodiversity around us. The museum itself houses the biodiversity collections, which have been accumulating for over 100 years on campus. Many universities have a biodiversity collection where researchers can come and access the information that comes with specimens, as well as their physical forms. We have artists, as well as researchers, scientists, writers, all sorts of people who can come in and get inspired by the collections. So having the museum to safeguard these, send them into the future is so important. One of the ways we do this is through our 6 different collections. This helps us stay organized. If you've ever tried to organize 100 things, let alone 2 million things, you've got to have some sort of a system in place. So our museum houses things in 6 different collections. Our tetrapod collection, which are vertebrate organisms that have or had ancestors who had 4 limbs. Our marine invertebrate collection, which are the invertebrate, so no backbone animals that live in the ocean. Our herbarium with fungi, lichen, vascular plants, and algae. We'll be talking quite a bit about vascular plants today. The entomological collection with insects and their relatives, the fish collection with fish, and of course the fossil collection, which encompasses all different types of organisms from all different eras. And we jointly manage this collection with the Pacific Museum of Earth. Now, when I say specimens, I refer to the types of physical objects we have at the museum. They can be pressed plants, preserved insects, fish in jars, or feathers, furs, and fossils. And all of these give us information about the world around us. There's labels that tell us where and when things were collected. Maybe that matches up to different seasons or different conditions of certain years. It also lets us know who's finding these things, where they are, the sizes, shapes, and colors that they are. When you walk into the museum, you come down underneath of the big blue whale skeleton, and the museum is all on one large level. It has 52 different rows of all sorts of biodiversity specimens, but we also showcase art exhibitions that rotate throughout the years. So currently we have one on our long wall on the north wall, but what you are here to see today is Fire Followers, which is in our Spotlight exhibition hallway, just close to the timeline. So on this corner, it is, or on this map, it is on the lower right-hand corner, kind of along 2 corners. And later today, Nancy will be walking us through that particular area. Now, if you're curious, you're welcome to explore our website. We've got all of these things available for download, but what you are here today to do is to hear from the wonderful creative folks behind Fire Followers, our current Spotlight exhibition. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have the time and space to talk to these 2 wonderful people today. So thank you so much for being with us, Megan and Sharon. It's always a joy to hear about the creative process behind an exhibition. So I'm going to pass it to the 2 of you. I'll keep driving the slides, so as you need me to, just let me know when I need to advance. So thanks, Sharon and Megan, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Nicole. It's our pleasure to be here today. We're going to introduce ourselves on the next slide. And so thanks everyone for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the profound gratitude I feel to live, work, and play on the unceded and traditional territories of the Sinixt people. My name's Sharon, and I'm a writer and freelance educational design consultant living in Rossland, British Columbia. Through my professional and personal work, I support organizations with cause and educational-driven mandates using principles of universal design and plain language to support inclusivity and accessibility for all. We also want to acknowledge and thank the Occam community on the traditional and unceded territories of the Ktunaxa First Nation for inviting us onto their land as part of this project. Over to Megs.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the painter behind this exhibition. I'm a storyteller through visual art, and my recent work explores the beauty of life and death with the use of flowers. I paint for my studio here in Vancouver, and it's where I call home. But I was actually born and grew up in the Kootenays in Cranbrook and Moyet, which is located on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa Nation and located near Occam First Nations community. This is really important because it's where a lot of the inspiration for the art came from in the show. visiting these places where I'm from helped shape this body of work and tie myself into it personally. So we're so fortunate to be able to visit places like Occam during our research period, and what we learned and saw wouldn't have been nearly as impactful to us without these very specific experiences that we got to have. So you can go to the next slide for our next part.
Awesome. So we're just going to go over what we'll talk about today. We've just done our introductions. Megs is going to do a brief project overview. I'm going to talk about my writing process and share with you all a story about visiting Occam. Megs is going to talk about her painting process. Nancy at the museum will take us on a virtual tour, and then hopefully we have some time for Q&A at the end. So let's move on to the next slide, and we're going to do a little interactivity to sort of get everyone's minds woken up and thinking about fire. So what are some words that come to mind when you think of wildfires? And there's no right or wrong answer. I'd just like to invite everyone to type their answers in the chat, and I'm going to read out some of the answers as they come in. Great. Increasing, renewal, devastation. Yes. Extreme loss of organisms. Yes. Destruction. Great. Climate change. Yes. Cycling. Yes. Fear. Wonderful. Yeah, when I was preparing for this activity, I also did, just read some of the recent news stories on the internet and other words, emergency, devastating, evacuation, threat. And so thanks everyone for participating. And even just this phrase itself, wildfire, can stir up frightening emotions. These are all kind of fear sort of words. But as we move into the next slides and look at some images from our project, I'd just like to invite everyone to participate in a thought experiment. So all these words are certainly true when we talk about forest fires, but I'd like everyone to consider if these are the only words that can apply to forest fires. And as we go through again today, let's listen for any alternative words. And if something catches your ear or makes you perk up, please comment in the chat about anything that you notice. I think we can move on to the next slide. And Megan is going to give us an overview. Sorry, go ahead, Megs.
Oh, no, it's okay. So our overview of our exhibition, our aim was to show both the destruction, but also the great beauty that comes from wildfire. We wanted to give voice to the forest and the communities affected by fire. Sharon wrote essays for the exhibit to tell stories of the communities that we visited, and I created art to tell stories of the forest. So we wanted to give voices to both those very important things. And then Sharon, I think, did you want to talk about your writing process?
I think I'm just gonna dive right into the next slide. We've got another interactivity. Yeah, so we have a couple more photos. And I'd like to invite Nicole to launch a poll that we have for you. So these two slides, the one on the left, you can see is green and has some flowers going. The one on the right looks pretty burned. There's some ashy soil and stuff like that. That big hole you see in the front is fire that completely burned the roots of a tree underground. So in our poll, we'd like you to consider these two photos and answer the poll question. And as you do, also keep in mind that these two burn sites happened in the same biogeozone, so the same forest characteristics, and they were located not very far from each other.
So Sharon, I just had a tough time launching that poll. Cassidy, I know you're here. If you can hit the launch poll button, that would be fabulous. I'll give her a moment to do that while we're waiting.
Oh, I can even launch it actually.
Cool. If you're able to, go for it.
There we go. The poll is up.
Cool. Fabulous.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So again, yeah, just take a moment to consider the two photos and how long do you think it has been since a fire happened in the one on the left, and how long for the one on the right. Yes, we see some answers coming in. Yeah, great. Yeah. Awesome. Let's just give it a few more seconds. Great. Thanks everyone for participating. I think let's share the poll results and have a little discussion. Awesome. Great. So for that first question, yeah, I think most of you are pretty right on, 2 to 6 months. So that photo on the right is a photo of a controlled burn that was done on Occam. And you can see regrowth almost right away within 2 to 6 months, which you might find surprising or maybe not, given that 60% of you selected that one. So the photo on the right, that's actually more than 12 months after. It's about 13 months after there's a wildfire. So you can absolutely see the contrast between the two. And I think we can stop sharing the poll results. Thank you very much. So yes, you can see the contrast between the two, and what we learned from our registered professional forester, John Brace, who works for the Occam community, was what happened on the right. There was a lot of fuel in that area. The fire ignited and it burned very quickly and very intensely. So it resulted in that, you can see that crusty layer on the top. That's like a hydrophobic or water-fearing layer of the soil. So fire is supposed to be regenerative. It's an essential part of forest health. But when these hotter, more intense fires happen, the land can't do its regenerative thing the way it's supposed to. So the fire releases the seeds into the soil. The next time it rains, you know, things start to germinate. But with that like super crust layer that happens in these intense fires, without human intervention, it can't do what it's supposed to do. So part of John's work was to figure out how to help this plot of land recover. And a few months after we visited, actually, so we visited in June of 2018, and I think by like August, they had a late spring rain, and this area was looking quite a bit more green than when we had visited. And I think that was a bit of a surprise to John, and a happy surprise. But he still had work to do to figure out how to help the land recover. And he had to write and execute this plan, or they call it a prescription when it comes to a plot of fire, to help the land. And through a combined effort of himself, they found a retired logger with extensive local knowledge to help, and they were successful in helping this land recover. So seeing these two contrasting images and areas and visiting Occam was a very eye-opening experience for us. We feel very lucky that John was willing to show us these two areas. He spent like a whole day with us, and he'd never met us before. It was a friend of a friend, and we called him up and he agreed to take us out. So in addition to John, we learned from many people who offered their time and their knowledge to this project. We learned so much about fires, and certainly there's a lot of dialogue happening right now about a way forward. One thing we've learned and heard consistently over and over again is there's a need to bring knowledge and voices together and share information and experiences. So if our project can contribute to building this dialogue in even a small way, we would consider that a success. There are many more people who shared their stories and information with us, and you can learn more and hear those stories by visiting the website and reading my essays. Thanks very much, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Megs, and she's going to share about her art process.
You can go to the next slide. All right, so I wanted to talk about the process I went through for creating the art for this show. Living in BC, forest fires have always been a part of life, definitely a lot more prominent in the last several years compared to when I was a kid. But I realized that I'd never really been fully immersed in an area that had been affected by a forest fire. It always was kind of this off in the distance thing. So it was kind of, I guess, the beginning of any series. When I start painting, it begins with a spark of curiosity that I want to look into. From there, I research that idea and I let it take me off in any tangent it naturally takes me down to form a concept. I did that with the beginnings of this project, but I realized that if I really wanted to properly form this very rough idea into something that I'd actually have to go beyond just research. I would have to actually go to some of these physical places. So I also didn't know what the art would look like and what form this concept would take, and if it would even make it past the stage of just curiosity. Some ideas just kind of hit an end point and they don't go any further. So I went to these places with my mind being a very blank canvas. But then when I finally did go to some of these places that were overtaken by forest fires, they were all so different, and it was so indescribable and so inspiring that I knew something would come out of it. You can go to the next slide. So while visiting these places, I couldn't really picture what the final art would look like. I knew my art would go in a new direction from what I normally paint, but I didn't know what form it would take. I didn't know what materials I was going to use. I didn't know what any of the final pieces would look like. So when I was there, I took all that time to gather as much information and inspiration that I could. I took a ton of reference photos. I did small study paintings while I was there. I wrote down thoughts and emotions that I had in these places, and I just gathered as much as I could to bring back to my studio to create something with it. You can go to the next slide. I also gathered chunks of charcoal from the burnt trees, thinking that somehow I'd like to incorporate that into my work. I'd never made paint before this. I always bought paint from the tube from the art store. So I knew even turning the chunks of charcoal into paint was going to be something new that I'd have to learn on this as well. Luckily, I know an incredibly talented artist here in Vancouver, Caitlin French. She creates works with wildcrafted pigments. So I was lucky enough to get her information. She helped me process some of this charcoal into paint so I could incorporate it into my work. I knew that this was very important to have the charcoal into my paintings because I wanted to take some pieces of the charred trees to kind of immortalize them into the work and sort of remember the past, but also celebrate the future and the new forest that would take its place. So that was one material I knew that I needed to have in these pieces. You can go to the next slide. So this photo shows a close-up of a couple of my final pieces and the texture that I was able to get from some of the charcoal, which was so interesting to work with. I usually work with an acrylic paint and it's like smooth and buttery. But depending on how I ground the charcoal, I could get it still pretty smooth, or I could get it really nice and chunky, and it would have these really interesting textures. With the pieces, I drew and painted on several layers of different types of paper and sort of stacking them together to kind of give like a nice depth and almost show layers of time. Also separating the plants from the charcoal, but also still bringing them back together in one cohesive piece. With the way that the paint is painted on, even though it's abstract, it wasn't just thrown on. I really tried to paint the charcoal either more aggressively or more sorrowfully, sort of give some emotion to the way that I was applying the paint. And when I added things like the color or when I was drawing the plants, I tried to give it more of a triumphant or positive feeling to kind of give different emotions, even though it's kind of a bit more abstract-ish. You can go to the next slide. Here are two final pieces from the show. There's actually quite a few more, but I wanted to talk about these two. The first one is celebrating fireweed. We saw meadows and meadows of it at the Rock Creek fire, and the fireweed was thriving there. It was so beautiful. It was just purple everywhere. I really wanted to give the feeling of triumph as the fireweed sort of bursting up and out from the blackness. So I did that with the paint, kind of bringing it up, even though the black is very aggressive, and then the flowers sort of floating up to kind of celebrate the fireweed. The next piece is celebrating pine cones, which were scattered on the ground every place we visited. Pine cones are actually tightly sealed with their seeds locked in. So the heat of fire can actually melt the resin that seals them closed, and that sets the seeds free to grow new trees. So in this piece, I actually have the charcoal on one of the lower layers of the piece. And with the paint itself, I wanted to give the feeling of sort of a whirlwind upwards in a circular motion and reference the circle of life and kind of coming out of the darkness. And with the charcoal on the bottom symbolizes how carbon-rich soil from the burnt matter will actually help the seeds of the new trees to kind of grow. So these are just two of the pieces that I have in the show. I have, I think, about 22 pieces as well as some other work in there, but that's just sort of like a sneak peek of a few of them. You can go to the next slide. So I think now we wanted to do sort of a walk through the exhibition for people that either can't make it to the show or want sort of a sneak peek to see what it's like before they come to the show. So I think we're handing that off.
Thank you. So I know that people will want to see this in person and be able to see all the amazing layers, you know, both visually and emotionally, but hopefully this will give you a sense of where it is in the museum, but also give you a chance to, you know, think of your questions for Megan and Sharon. So let me know anytime you want me to stay still on a particular place and ask a particular question, but I will just kind of walk through the exhibit. So there's, back up a little.
So I wanted to, oh yeah, in the display cases, this one, we actually have some of my experiments, and I've got some of my chunks of charcoal and then some of the pigment that I actually made from the charcoal and some of my rough sort of studies that I was trying to get certain feelings from different shapes in there. And one thing too that Sharon and I really wanted with the exhibit is it's not random how we've laid it out. We've definitely started with a little bit more of like the darker art, a lot more charcoal in the pieces, a lot more kind of darker parts of the story. And then as you go along the exhibit, we try to kind of turn the conversation a little bit more positive to see the positive things that wildfire and forest fires can bring. So we wanted sort of both sides of the story in this exhibit, and we wanted it to flow really nicely. So you can see at the beginning here, it's a lot more where I'm just working with charcoal and paint. And then as it goes on, and the last piece is the only piece without any charcoal in it. And it's actually referencing one of Sharon's stories and a person that we met, and it's called, I can't remember what the name of the piece was, but it was kind of a positive story. And you can kind of read Sharon's story and you'll probably hear about it more there. Sharon, do you want to talk anything about the pieces and your banners?
Yeah, I did just want to say on that banner, Bonnie just commented and she said what stood out for her in the essay was learning about the impermeability of the soil. So in this banner that we're looking at right here, that is a picture of the soil, and you can just see like how crusty that is, right? Like nothing can get in there. And it was really interesting to see that in person, and really surprising for us to learn that as well.
I think as well, us coming from a background that isn't in any forestry, and we're more both creatives and we're curious about this, we felt like things that surprised us and was exciting and that we were learning for the first time, we felt like this is a lot of things that everyone would be very interested in and they would be learning for the first time. So we tried to really bring a lot of that there, and especially with that place in Ockham where it was the hydrophobic layer and things were just struggling to regrow. And then seeing so close by where it was a control burn and how beautiful and lush it was, just even being those two places right next to each other, and then even just the photos beside each other, seeing that huge difference was such an eye-opening experience. And I know that as a visual artist, I need visual things to really understand, not just text. So I think that really helps as well. And that piece there is celebrating lupin. And these were a bunch of small pieces that I wanted to sort of showcase different plants and flowers that we saw in some of our travels. The banners in the exhibition as well, they're excerpts of Sharon's essays. So it's kind of like a little teaser to see what she's writing about in each one. And then they have a QR code too that you can go to the website to read the full essays, which you can also go to the Beaty Biodiversity Museum website and read the full things if you're not able to go in to see. And there at the back of the museum, it was actually a video that we put together with just small tidbits of creating the show. So I show little bits of me making the pigment and sort of painting, and Sharon writing, and small video clips of us going to a few of the places. And you can actually see that online if you want the full video. And there's the pine cone piece. And then I think the last piece is the piece that I was talking about, I think I titled it Meadow of Flowers. And that one was referencing somebody that we met that Sharon knows, and it's in one of her essays. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one, Sharon? Because it's sort of the show ender and it was an important part.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Osoyoos, and sort of the same as Meg's, right? Like forest fire is kind of part of growing up in those places. And the photo on the bottom right here that Nancy is just showing, that's from Osoyoos. And you can see that the tree branches are black, but there's these beautiful yellow flowers in the background. And we visited when we first started our trip, we visited a woman there named Barb, and she's the mom of one of my high school mates. And we didn't plan this at all. It was so coincidental, and we thought it was really important that this kind of happened to us at the beginning of our research trip. And we just kind of had drove into this area because we knew that there had been fires there, and Barb just happened to be in her yard doing some yard work. So we stopped to say hello. And she shared with us this beautiful story about how wildfire had threatened her home several times in the recent years. And she finally decided to take some action and clear some of the brush behind her house. And in sort of opening up the tree canopy and clearing the forest floor, the next summer she was really treated to a variety of like wildflowers. She described it as a beautiful like forest carpet of wildflowers, and just that imagery of her words I felt was very strong and very informative for our project. And I think that really helped set the tone as we moved forward. So yeah, it was a really cool experience.
So that's my only piece without any charcoal in it, because it was to sort of celebrate her beautiful meadow of flowers that she described.
If it's okay, I'll just show the one before that, because I actually hadn't realized that the charcoal was in this one before.
Yeah, that was the one with the pine cones where I put it more to the back, and I'm more kind of bringing the lightness up, and they're sort of feeding off the charcoal for new life.
Beautiful.
And as well, on that last banner, that picture of the morel mushroom, I don't know, I didn't really know this before. I don't know if other people know it, but find it interesting. Morel mushrooms thrive after there's been a wildfire. So when we visited Moyer near Cranbrook, where Megs grew up, we went to this area that had a wildfire, I think the year before we went, so 2017, right, Megs?
Yeah, I believe so. That was the year.
Yeah, it was a very, very big fire. And, you know, it's sort of the same result as what we saw in that wildfire in Occam with you know, the fire not being able to sort of recover, except tons of
The sound is cut out for me. Is that for anybody else?
I think Sharon might have froze.
Mhm.
Oh,
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it looks like Sharon's computer froze. So let's maybe move to that last banner and think about the magic of morels as she joins us again. And yeah, thank you.
yeah. One thing too that we really wanted with this
around, we were able to pick some and you know,
oh, I think she keeps freezing in and out. Internet.
I'm here. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Okay, now we can.
Great. I just turned off my video. My internet is unstable. So the joys of living in the mountains.
You cut out kind of mid-morel mushroom talking.
Oh, I was just saying that, yeah, we got to pick and eat morels, which was really cool.
Yeah, and that was one that we found in the forest, and then we picked it and then brought it. We went to my stepdad's house, who used to be a chef, so he cooked it for us. We brought it there, and we know that some plants have something called false friends, where they look like they're the correct thing, but they could be poisonous. So we brought it home, and we're like, okay, we should double check that this isn't the false friend poisonous mushroom. Put it in the fridge, came home, and my stepdad was already cooking with it. And we're like, wait, we need to double check that it's a morel mushroom, and quickly did that before we ate it. And it was. Luckily, if you look it up, they're actually quite a bit different. But that was really exciting to have. It was a very interesting part of our journey of getting to eat a morel mushroom for the first time during this research trip. And those are just some of my sketchbooks that I brought with me when we were on the road for a research trip. And I would kind of just take down as much information as I could and write down everything in sketches. And they're quite full. It's too bad that you can only see one page and can't flip through them, but you can see some of the pages in the video that we have posted online, or I kind of quickly flip through them as well. And that's a pressed flower of fireweed. It's actually a scan of an actual pressed flower, because you don't want to actually have it out in the light. Our exhibition is so long, you don't want to have it out. So that's like a little pressed flower of fireweed from the museum.
So Nicole, did you have any questions in the chat that you wanted to read out?
Yeah, how about, Megan, was there anything else you wanted to show on the tour, and we can transition to the Q&A if you're ready for that?
Yeah, I think we're ready for the Q&A.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Nancy, for walking us through the exhibit. I'm going to share my screen again. That was a nice walkthrough, and you will be able to walk through at your own preferred pace when you visit in person and explore on the website as well. So I'm just going to unpin Nancy's video here. Fabulous. So again, thank you, Megan and Sharon, for walking us through. We had a couple questions come up in the chat, but before we get to them, Derek, was there anything that you wanted to highlight or ask?
No, I was just going to thank Megan and Sharon for talking about the show today. And yeah, I was going to bring forward some of the questions that came up in the chat, but Nicole, go ahead if you want to read them out.
If you could read them out, that would be actually great. It's having a tough time on my computer right now. We're all having some tech issues, I think.
Of course. Yeah, so there's a question that came in from Bonnie. She says, how have your ideas changed regarding forestry practices, and what's your take on how they might be changing due to climate change?
I'll go first. I just want to say, like I said, coming into this, I have no forestry background, and coming into it as an artist, I didn't even know what a control or prescribed burn was before this. So that was super eye-opening, and learning how that can actually help the forest. So yeah, and that's such a tricky thing too, when learning about prescribed burns and how they have to be done at a very specific time, and there's so many variables that go into it. And we've had so long of fire suppression that actually that's one of the many reasons why forest fires are so bad. That's I think it's going to be a long way to go to get forestry practices to where they need to be and have healthier forests. But I don't even know what climate change, how much worse it's making it for the forest. It seems like it's pretty bad. So it feels like it needs to be a little bit more up on importance, I guess. Sharon, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, oh, my internet is still unstable. What is happening?
We can hear you good at least though right now.
Okay, I've turned off my video. If you guys freeze, I'm just going to stop talking. So how my ideas changed regarding forestry practices. I think something that Meg's touched on a little bit that we learned is sort of our idea, and in our mind's eye, what we think a healthy forest is, what we think it looks like, right? And we have this sort of idea in our mind that these very densely packed, tight forests are healthy, and that's what they should be. But really, a lot of our forests are overpopulated with trees because of this fire suppression. And I should caveat that with saying it's not true for everything. It depends on the biogeozone that it's in, which is something that we've learned. So, our ideas are changing because we know that there's so much information, and all of this stuff plays together. And I guess that's what biodiversity is, right? And as well, the climate change piece. So something that we learned in Cranbrook about doing prescribed burns is that even if places want to do prescribed burns, you have to have what they call an environmental window of opportunity. So that means under 30 degrees in temperature and over 30% humidity. Otherwise, if you try and do a burn, it can remain, like they might not be able to extinguish it if it's too hot or too dry when they do it, and that fire can live underground for a long time and maybe pop up later as a spot fire when they don't want it to. So that was something, the importance of prescribed burns is known, but and people want to do them, but the environment maybe is not cooperating so much these days. Thanks for that question, Bonnie.
And that window of opportunity is probably getting smaller and smaller as climate change is happening. So it's probably making it even more difficult.
Thanks for your answers. Yeah, we just had a comment come in from Meta Vaughn, who says it's really cool getting a bit of an understanding of what's happening in the forests. In the city, I just get the terrible smoke season and apocalyptic sunsets. So yeah, I think we all remember those from the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for Megan and Sharon if they want to take another one. Usually we don't get to talk to artists as often on this feed, so I wonder if you could talk to us about how you started practicing your different art forms.
Yeah, Megs, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I've always done art since I was young. I don't think there was ever a time that I didn't. So it's just been very natural to me and very much part of who I am. So I don't think I could ever not create art. But it's been really interesting these last couple of years doing a project like this, where it's a lot of research-based stuff that goes into my work as well, instead of some of my other work, which is still, I'm researching, but in a different sense. Like this is a lot more scientific research going into my work rather than maybe just symbolism and like mythology or other places that I take from. So it's been a very interesting little path that I'm going down, and I've been enjoying it so much. And also having work that has a different kind of an impact on people, and hoping to create work that maybe would draw people in that wouldn't necessarily be interested in forest fires, and draw them in with this work and these beautiful paintings and these really interesting essays that speak about like people and communities, and educate people on stuff that maybe they wouldn't have necessarily went to sort of been drawn to learning about. So it's been really exciting for me. So Sharon, do you want to talk about your work?
Yeah, so my answer is kind of similar to Meg's. Like, I've always really enjoyed writing. And, you know, I'm a very curious person by nature. I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. So yeah, I've always kind of written stuff. Like I write education for a living. So writing kind of just pops up in all these different aspects of my life. But I really enjoyed with this particular project, like exploring and learning more about something that has played such a role in my life on an ongoing basis. And I sort of just accepted forest fire as something that just happened. I don't know. And we learned that fire is cyclical for forests, and they should burn every 7 to 10 years. And as you know, I thought about my experiences with this project and learning that and learning about fires. You know, I remember growing up in Oswego, it's like, oh yeah, we had that fire in 1993. Oh, and then we had that one in 2003. Oh, and then wasn't it like 2013? And so like learning the information and then actually relating that back to my lived experience was very eye-opening, very interesting as well.
Great, thank you. We had another comment come in from Sheila, who said it's a difficult conflict between the controlled and uncontrolled fires, especially thinking about the animals as opposed to the plants, and considering availability of animals from the former, but not necessarily the latter. So I guess, yeah, when you do a controlled burn, like the animals that are in that area and what happens to them. So sort of the many considerations and the impacts on across the entire ecosystem when any kind of wildfire happens, or even a controlled burn. So thanks, Sheila, for your comment there.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit if you don't mind, Derek.
Sure.
We talked mostly about vegetation and plants and stuff like that. But when we visited Ockham, we learned a little bit about they're having problems with their elk population, I think, in Cranbrook. And so we talked a little bit about that and how like the moss from the trees is food for the elk. And when you have wildfire and are losing your trees, then the elk also lose their source of food. But as well, when you do the controlled burns, you know, write your prescription for your plot of land and help the forest to recover to the way it should be. That also, again, it creates a more hospitable environment for animals to thrive. So it all is really interconnected.
All right, thanks for that long view there. It's good perspective. Nicole, did you want to move to the next slide maybe, and we can show some of the other...
Absolutely. Before we did that, I just wanted to mention that last summer we had Jen Barron from the Tree Ring Lab at UBC Forestry do our Beaty at Home, and she talked quite a bit about forestry and fire as well from the more academic side of things. So, you know, for those of you who are wanting to dive a little bit deeper, that is available to you as well. But it's so great to hear so many different angles of the story many of us can relate to, for sure. So Megan and Sharon, I wasn't sure if there's any,
No, sorry, I realized you were maybe waiting for us. We just also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge some of the people that supported us in this project. You know, the ones that we've mentioned here on the slide, but everyone who offered for their time, their thoughts, suggestions, resources, including the Beaty Museum for giving us a venue to show this project. So thank you to everyone who has supported us. And I think just on the last slide, if you'd like to continue this dialogue or have a story to share about your experience with fire or any additional questions, you can find us online at our account. So please feel free to follow or like any of our social media. You can reach us by email. And remember to use the hashtag #FireFollowers if you're going to share a story or a photo online. So you can continue to contribute to the dialogue. And I think that's it for us, Nicole. Just pass it back to you to wrap things up.
Awesome. Well, thank you to both of you. Thank you, Nancy, for walking us through the exhibition. Thank you, Derek, for facilitating this wonderful show, as well as helping out with our Q&A. And of course, thank you to everybody who is joining us today. I'm not too sure what happened. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. I really appreciate all of you who contributed to the museum, whether it's through sharing information, your stories, you know, checking out the exhibit, as well as those of you who donated online. We do really, really appreciate it. And I will say that we have our next Beaty at Home on August 4th. As we go into the summer, we're winding down. We're not hosting them every single week, but you can join our interpretive team, including Nancy, for an exploration into some local wildlife in the Metro Vancouver area. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And do come and visit. We will love to see you. So thanks very much, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.